Hey Osiris, I didn't hear no bell. Considering I watched this movie like nary 3 hours ago, hopefully I got that name right. I believe that was the villain's name, but I do not remember exactly. So yeah, welcome back everybody. Here is another recommendation review for a movie that has probably been out of the cultural zeitgeist for a minute, if it was ever in it in the first place. Today I will be looking over and reviewing the film Samaritan, directed by Julius Avery and written by someone whose name I probably will pronounce completely incorrectly, Ragi F. Shutt. I am notoriously bad at pronouncing names correctly, but it came out in 2022 and it was released on Amazon Prime. And the main star of the film is, as that joke I just made should clue you in, Sylvester Stallone. I was recommended to watch this movie by a gentleman that used to swim at the YMCA that I used to regularly attend. We'll just call him Marv. And yeah, Marv suggested quite a few films, including ones that I have in the ranking document that I have, but have not done videos on because I watched them before I started regularly making YouTube content. But I don't know, I've just been missing that particular YMCA and all the friends that I made while going to it. Mr. I literally texted you like 3 or 4 minutes ago. But Mr. Marv suggested this movie and I just never got around to it. And so after the Die Hard movie review, I kind of set it in my mind that I was going to watch this movie very, very legally. So as usual, I will go over the movie kind of in brief, non-spoiler sort of territory, and then I will give my score, and then I will kind of talk about the spoilers. Again, this movie is like 2 years old at the time of recording this video, so I don't know how much that particularly matters, but it's how I like to structure things. Okay, so none of what I am about to tell you is what I would consider to be a spoiler, because the first like 5 minutes of the movie is devoted to this sort of setup. So Samaritan starts with a summarization of past events that predate the start of the narrative in the movie. 25 years ago, there was a set of meta-human twins that, as far as I can recall from watching the movie earlier, just kind of become meta-human out of nowhere.
But now, for no reason.
And there was like this big dramatic battle between the two of them because one of them was good and one of them was evil, and one of them died, and the villain of them is professed to have died, and the modern culture of this world doesn't really know what ever happened to the good one. Let's simplify things because, again, in the first 5 minutes they basically line all of this out. The Samaritan was the superhero, as it were, whereas Nemesis was the villain, the bad guy. And the beginning of the movie kind of focuses on this young child named Sam, who kind of like doodles in his notebook pictures of the Samaritan and stuff, and it is revealed that he and his mother kind of have some vague connection to the Samaritan public figure. I mean, he was a superhero, obviously there was some public saving of people, but Sam and his mother are not, you know, living the high life. Just because they brushed with greatness in the past does not mean that their lives are particularly glamorous. And to be fair, that is something you could also say as part of the setup and world building that Samaritan embarks upon. There is a lot of homelessness. The city that the movie takes place in, Granite City, has a massive unemployment problem. The city is rife with homeless, you know, much like pretty much every city in modern America. But anyway, the plot kind of gets moving because Sam, you know, lacking a father figure, kind of gets involved with the wrong people. I want to say he gets involved in a gang, but the gang, as it were, doesn't really factor into the movie rather prominently until later on. But basically, some hoodlums try to recruit Sam into their gang, and when he kind of doesn't rise to the standards that they want him to, Sylvester Stallone's character steps in and defends Sam, and in the process of so doing, Sam basically becomes unsure as to whether or not the Samaritan is actually gone. And then the first act is mostly just Sam and who he believes the Samaritan is, Joe Smith. Sam and Joe basically bond and get to know each other better, and the mystery of whether or not Joe is in fact the Samaritan gets a lot of focus in that first act of the movie. Let me drop in some of my commentary here. The movie starts out kinda sorta slow in that regard because I'll just admit to it, before I actually watched the movie, I looked up the IMDB page for Samaritan and I saw the IMDB rating, which was like 5.6 out of 10 or something like that. And so the movie was kind of slow to start and I was worried. I was like, oh no, IMDB told me this was not going to be good. And thankfully my expectations were sort of subverted, but I can safely say that that kind of slow burn actually kind of pays off, because as Sam and Joe kind of get more involved with each other, Joe kind of lets Sam know more about his own personal life and history, and you know, the two kind of learn things from each other. They become, I don't know if I would say friends, but they get closer to that. It's not really a spoiler to say by the end of the movie they pretty much are friends, but those hoodlums that I mentioned, they do work for a larger gang, the member of which was played by the guy that was one of the two Russian twins in the Daredevil show on Netflix, from what I can tell. If he isn't, I just have really bad eyesight, if you couldn't tell from my appearance. Alright, brief intermission timeout. My girlfriend needs help feeding the dogs, so I get to be a foot servant and, you know, bring Po' Boy and Remy their meals for the evening. Please hold. We are going to get back to the movie review in a second, but I just wanted to showcase, I want everyone to meet Emiko. How are you doing, Emiko? Emiko is our second kitty. I do not know which video it is, but one of my earlier videos has Fuji in it. Fuji is Emiko's best friend, and yes, Emiko is named after the female character, the woman Emiko from the original Gojira. She's a little bit more orange than Fuji is. So, I don't really know where I was, but basically by the end of the film, the question of who is Joe Smith is answered, and obviously we get to see a little bit more in terms of superhuman action, because as far as I'm concerned and know, this is technically a superhero movie, and I don't really think this is much of a spoiler to say, but Joe Smith's superpowers are not particularly interesting. I imagine this movie was made on a budget, especially because it was made for Amazon Prime, and much like Rings of Power and its noticeable lack of quality, I imagine the budget had something to do with this. It really feels like this could have been released in like the 80s as like a generic action movie, and you could have taken all of the superhuman, meta-human elements out of it, and it still would have worked. But yeah, by the end of the movie, we learn kind of the truth about Joe Smith, and we learn the nature of his relationship to the Samaritan nemesis kind of nexus of history within this reality. First, for the positive elements that I really dug. This movie is hardcore carried by Sylvester Stallone and his acting. I know a lot of people like to make fun of Sylvester Stallone for his acting.
Great scene. Now hold up. Picture the same scene with Stallone and Schwarzenegger. You ain't gonna be able to understand Stallone is doing, but you know,
But to me, and particularly in this movie due to his relationship with Sam, the main boy, Stallone portrays a very world-weary, experienced man with a sort of fatherly streak in him, and it kind of reminded me of the Rocky movies in a way. That's probably just due to association with Sylvester Stallone, but he struck me as more Rocky than Rambo. Obviously, he's not exactly either of those characters, actors in this movie. Joe Smith is his own thing. I think this is the first movie actually where I heard Sylvester Stallone say the F-bomb. Although I'm probably just not remembering the Rambo movies very well. Although I have not seen Rambo 3 at all, and I was unfortunate enough to have seen Last Blood. But yeah, Sylvester Stallone carries this movie, and though the story does have a fair bit of cliches and tropes in it, I have also watched a lot of superhero media over the years, partially due to my love for Marvel. So the fact that I kind of knew where some of it was going and some of the broader strokes isn't really the movie's fault, and like I said, I think it was made on a budget. Man, recording this video has more cuts than an emo teenager's wrists. Long story short, I think Sylvester Stallone carries the movie. I think Sam doesn't really act particularly well. I know it's rather difficult when you have child actors. Or in his case, really young actors, like preteen actors, to squeeze good performances out of them. The writing, like I said, I'd criticize as kind of cliched and tropey. I can get more into the weeds about that in the spoiler section, but overall, this just kind of feels like an action movie that was only made a superhero movie because the superhero zeitgeist is big in the popular culture at the time that it was released, which was 2022, as I said previously. Overall, what would I rank this movie? Now, if you have watched any of my other movie review videos, you know that I have previously ranked things, you know, pretty high. I mean, not like through the roof, but pretty decent. And Marv, I'm sorry to tell you, but this one, I didn't really dig it that much. Like I said, if this movie had been made in like the 80s, I feel like not much would have changed. The effects might have been not as good, but it was pretty much just generic Stallone action movie. Stallone says some things that are kind of poignant, you know, cool things like, you know, there's good and bad in all men, and, you know, I anticipate that you will let the good in your heart prevail, or something like that, something to that effect. He also made a really good line where he was like, breaking things is easy, it's fixing them that is a little bit more complicated. And Joe Smith says something about that basically being therapeutic for him. And at that point in the movie, his exact disposition to the whole Samaritan Nemesis Nexus is kind of unclear. But the big problem that I have with this movie is it suffers from what I refer to as MMTA syndrome. Modern movie third act syndrome. Every movie made since like 2013 has a serial problem in my mind. We can't just end the movie. The third act has to have not one, not two, not three, at least 4 different climaxes where you're never quite sure where the movie is going to actually end. There were several parts where I was like, oh well, I guess that's the end of it. I guess Joe is really done for this time. And then, you know, of course, he is still alive. I feel like, oh, Sam's about to watch his hero go out in a burst of flames, and then he doesn't. The twist is really good, but the problem is that once the twist happens, I feel like you had like 20 minutes to wrap things up, and the movie just kind of drags along like it is afflicted with a terminal illness. Also, here's the kind of weird thing. The movie's about 2 hours long, which kind of ties in with MMTA syndrome. But the thing is, after the credits started rolling, I actually started thinking about it, and I saw some of those 1980s action movie flashbacks play in my mind. Because I was like, once the actual film decides it's over, it's over. Like, when the credits finally should start coming into your mind, you know, the ending is sort of vague, which I don't really fault it for, but, you know, Joe Smith, like, disappears into the crowd that has gathered following the climactic finale. So, in that respect, it does feel, in some ways and respects, like a a movie from a bygone era. Like I said, I feel like it could have been a classic 1980s action flick. But the problem is, for like 40 minutes, or well, maybe that's too much, 30 minutes before that, a lot of bombastic action just starts happening, and you're like, okay, a little bit of this could maybe suffice. But it just keeps going and going and going. Basically, the movie is fine, but it's kind of flawed. I feel like the Sylvester Stallone parts, which the movie does, like I said, take a little bit to get to, or like an 8 out of 10, and then there's the rest of the movie that sits at like a 5, like the most painfully mediocre movie you've ever watched. And just before I get on to the spoilers, let me just outline what I consider a 6 out of 10 movie and some examples that I currently have in the document that are that. A 6 out of 10 film is, quote, an entertaining film that cements itself in the conscious of the viewer beyond the initial watch, but lacks in several ways to a significant degree. And the two examples that I have listed here are radically different films, although coincidentally one is a superhero movie from the 2000s. I consider the original 2000s Chris Evans as Human Torch Fantastic Four to be a 6 out of 10, and I also consider the film Major Payne to be a 6 out of 10 as well. Obviously their genres are very different, but they kind of remain in my consciousness. Like, there are parts of those movies that I remember very fondly, but they're not particularly stunning or great. I wouldn't straight up call them patently mediocre, and in the case of Samaritan, I would chalk that up mostly to Sylvester Stallone kind of having enough of a viewing history in my mind, as well as some acting chops and life experience that kind of elevates the material that he has been given, but I can't really praise it any more than that. Overall, I don't really recommend this movie. It's fine. I mean, if you have Amazon Prime, I don't feel like I wasted my time watching it, but I've seen better Diet Coke discount superhero movies than this. Your time is probably best spent watching something else. It's fine, and that's about it. I don't hardcore regret watching it. Okay, warning siren. Start now. This is going to be the spoiler discussion. If you haven't seen Samaritan, and for some reason you are, like, looking forward to watching it, then don't watch the rest of the video. Okay, I'm going to go through my ratings document and kind of just read off the bullet points I have here that strike me as particularly interesting or open things up to discussion or provide an easy setup for a punchline. I would say this bullet point, but I feel like people wouldn't allow me to get away with that joke. Is the head of the Hoodlums the guy that played Flash in the MCU? It doesn't really move the needle on whether or not I find that actor to be any good, and they may not be the same actor, but I don't know, he just reminded me of him for some reason. Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of Sam as a character. In fact, I don't know at what point in the runtime it happens, but for a good chunk of the first act, I did not even know that his name was Sam. His relationship with, like, the bookstore conspiracy theory guy was fine, but I don't know. I think child actors are just not really my speed. I'm not really a big fan of them in productions of this sort. I mean, I get the purpose, which is that he is a focal point through which we can be informed as the audience, because he is relatively uninformed due to his youth, but it's just not great. I actually wrote a surprising amount down in this document as I went through, and I attribute that mostly to the fact that I love superheroes, and so I probably just felt like I had a lot to say given the genre. Okay, so the gangster villain who is played by the Daredevil guy, Cypress, I think, again, showing you just how memorable the names of the characters in this movie are. He and his crew just kind of like waltz into a police evidence lockup, and I really liked the kind of casual demeanor of waltzing into the evidence lockup and dropping a bomb down the hatch, basically. But the thing is, that particular lockup is neither before nor after made out to be some kind of important location. I know they mentioned that police picked up the masks of Nemesis and Samaritan following the kind of prologue power plant explosion, but that particular lockup, I feel like if those characters, those public entities, those metahumans were of as much importance in the kind of culture of that world as they are professed to be, I feel like there would be a lot more security. And Nemesis has like a super-powered hammer that is just locked up like any other firearm would be in police lockup. And I was just like, why? Why is it just...
Oh, you know, just hanging around?
Boo!
So that could have been set up a little bit better, in my mind. Yes, I have written here very briefly, written at approximately 34 minutes and 52 seconds into the runtime. Quote, well, at least now the single mother of Sam is justified in her existence. They did say that Samaritan and Nemesis's parents were killed by townfolk for some reason in the intro. So Sam needing a father figure to look up to, Joe Smith in this case, actually sort of justifies it. It's still a tad bit tropey and cliche, but it's not bad. And then immediately following a somewhat positive bullet point, I have written here as a question that is rhetorical because obviously I'm writing this for myself. It says, what is this Diet Bane speech? Referring, of course, to the speech that Bane gives in The Dark Knight Rises.
We take Gotham from the corrupt, the rich, the oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity, and we give it back to you, the people.
Yeah, so I really like the kind of old man superhero shtick that Joe kind of puts on. You know, I recently watched a long-form video reaction of Logan, and I can definitely say that Hugh Jackman's sort of old man Logan routine is very distinct from Sylvester Stallone's old man superhero routine. Obviously, the Samaritan is not the Wolverine, but hopefully you kind of see what I'm getting at there. And like I said before, Joe Smith, Sylvester Stallone, really struck me as a sort of Rocky Balboa with superheroes type, although obviously a little bit more erudite and educated than that. It really reminded me of the scene in the original Rocky with Little Marie.
You get no respect, you understand? You get no respect. I gotta use a bad word. Whore, you understand? Whore. You see, they don't remember you, they remember the rep.
You hang around coconuts, sooner or later you're gonna be a coconut. And then shortly after that bullet point, I have written here, I can't whistle either, Sam. Because I think Cypress tries to teach him or enlist him to do some criminal activity, and Sam is unable to pull it off because he can't whistle. Yeah, at about 1 hour, 12 minutes, 34 seconds I wrote, at this point I'm going to be very disappointed if it turns out Samaritan is just actually Samaritan and not a reformed Nemesis. You know, I give movies hell for being tropey, but the film has earned it at this point. Just do it!
Do it! Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams.
And obviously, I'm not in the non-spoiler section at this point. Yeah, Joe Smith is not the Samaritan, which I guess is a positive thing because I thought he would be the Samaritan at about 1 hour and 12 minutes into the movie, and I was really hoping that he was actually going to turn out to be Nemesis and that Nemesis had survived the explosion at the power plant and was kind of trying to fill the role that his brother tried to fill. And that's why he kept the newspaper clippings, because his brother was actually dead and he was just kind of trying to keep the memories of the times that he did good with him, to kind of try and keep the memory of his brother alive in his actions at the very least. Yeah, okay, so written at approximately 1 hour, 24 minutes, and 2 seconds. Quote, okay, we're slipping into modern movie unnecessarily long syndrome territory. Yeah, as the bullet point point continues from here. Cypress really wasn't all that interesting as a villain, and I don't blame the actor. I mostly just blame that on the fact that due to budget and the fact that this is an original superhero kind of universe, they didn't really have enough time to go into the villain and make me hate him super much. I mean, him shooting the cop was kind of in that vague vicinity, but it wasn't enough. So yeah, once Joe Smith says, I'm not the good guy, I'm the bad guy, basically.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Anyone keeping score? That was like cut number 4. Am I just not allowed to review a movie today? Even in my movie review document, I cannot help but misspell things. Okay, yeah, here's another rather egregious thing. The reason I said the movie feels like an 80s action movie is because there are a handful of one-liners. Earlier in the movie, at some point, Joe Smith, like, throws a thug, and when he throws the guy, he says, fly. And that one was pretty good, but then in the climax, or rather in the finale, he like jams a grenade into a guy's like stomach or something, and he does the, you know, cool guys don't look at explosions thing while he's walking away, and he says, have a blast. And, you know, I was not like knocked off of my feet when I was at that point in the movie, but I was like, come on, this movie is better than that. Honestly, the character drama elements of the movie were far better to me than the whole herder, it's a superhero movie parts were. Pretty soon after that, when Joe Smith is fighting Cypress, and Cypress is like, oh, you used to be my hero, I'm gonna do it the right way, you lost your way, Sam, you can go cry about it. I understand why it was done, but the parallels to the kind of flashback sequence of Nemesis and Samaritan fighting was just so blatantly on the nose. I was realizing that the modern movie third act syndrome was really starting to set in, and I was starting to kind of see the puppet strings, because it was pretty obvious to me. I was like, they really have no faith in the ability of the audience to kind of figure out like, oh, the villain is upset. Oh, Samaritan is actually Nemesis, and he has to save Sam and win the day. The movie couldn't just do that. It had to do that like 3 or 4 different ways, which I personally would have found insulting. I mean, I guess I already did say that it was, because if you're smart enough, you should be able to parse that out and be like, oh, okay.
I see what's happening, yeah.
Okay, so now I'm at the part where the credits have started rolling, and I wrote here, quote, that was a good movie fused with a mediocre one. There was so much good in it that could have gone somewhere great, most of it being off the back of Stallone being a great actor for this particular character, but it falls apart due to oh so many failings of modern cinema. And then immediately after that I have, if we only count everything after Joe gets Sam out of the burning building safely, the movie's ending is approximately quick and hits the beats it needed to, including Joe's message to Sam, but that cannot be strictly divorced from the never-ending cavalcade of false finishes that preceded it. So I didn't hate the movie, but it left a lot to be desired. Like I said, the IMDB rating kind of scared me. I was like, oh no, this isn't going to be very good, is it? But it actually kind of redeemed itself toward the end of the first act. I guess maybe you could say the second act was the best part to me, although I could be delineating the acts for the movie wrong. But the third act kind of squandered what goodwill it had brought up in my mind. Anyway, that about does it for me today, guys. That review really took it out of me. Just for the people that have stuck around this long, I'll give you a full look at the shirt that I have been wearing this entire time. And like I said, a gentleman at the YMCA recommended me this movie, and I remember distinctly never wearing this t-shirt to the Y because I was worried that I was going to run afoul of the rules. Anyway, here is my shirt. Get muscles, get girls. It's vaguely inspired by Bro Science Life because he usually says stuff to that effect. I'm not going to repeat what he says because I don't want to say anything particularly spicy today, but basically the shirt means get cut, get butt. I made a list list of proxies for that, but I can't remember them off the top of my head, and like I said, I think some of them probably would not have been completely appropriate. Drop a like if you have watched Samaritan because of this review or otherwise, or drop a like if you plan to watch it now because of my criticisms of it. Marv, I hope you're happy, and no, I have not forgotten about you. I also have not forgotten about who is the next recommendation that I have to watch. So maybe let her know, if I don't do it myself through text, that I will be watching that movie next. Comment telling me if you thought my opinion was particularly bad or good. My next movie review isn't coming out for a while. I'm recording this on the same day as the release of the Fire Rodan Godzilla Save the Earth Melee Monster Manual video. So that should probably tell you how far in the past this video was recorded, vaguely. Subscribe if you like making my brain happy by giving it number go up good. And I will talk to you guys in the next video because I need to turn on a fan or something. It's getting warm in here. Take it easy, guys. Catch you on the flip side, as it were. Wind that back. Let me flip the script.
Can I eat your brains? Yay or nay? Seeing some yay faces over here.